Okay, cool. So we were at this point. So I have your project set up under my code folder here. And I also have it loaded up here. So if we do pwd, you can see where we are. And basically, you can just follow the instructions on the screen.
Okay.
So we already have files, so no need for this. To initialize it, git init. And what this does, you can actually see what it does here. So initialized empty Git repository here. So
I don't do this as well, right? You're doing it for the project already?
yeah, so a Git repo, there'll be one centralized location, which is on GitHub. That's where everyone pushes their code to, so it can be shared from there. But everyone has their own instance of it, their own copy. And then when you make a change, you're going to upload that change to GitHub.
Right, but what I mean, what you're doing here right now, not everybody has to do this. You're just doing the setup, and that's just one account needs to do that once.
No. So once I push the code, like you see here right now, it's empty, right? So there's no files.
Yeah.
Once I push the code, it's going to have all the files it needs. And instead of like doing this step where you initialize it, you'll be able to clone the whole repo. And so it'll already be initialized. But these steps still apply. Adding things, committing things, making branches, pushing, those still apply.
Oh, okay.
But the initialization step won't apply if you're going to clone it. It's just that we're starting from scratch here. So I'm going to initialize it. So what that did here was created a .git folder. And that's basically how the Git software keeps track of everything in your project, like what branches you have, what files are added to stage, and your commit logs and stuff like that. That's all in that folder. So you don't see it by default, right? If we open up in our Finder, actually, it should just see something like this, because there's a concept called hidden files, right?
Yeah.
So those are your dot files. So on a Mac, if you press Command Shift dot, you can actually see your hidden files. I usually do that when I'm coding because it's just more explicit. So that's it. And then we can add everything. So we have a bunch of files here. So we can just do add all. But before I do that, if we're looking at our files here, let's take note of a few things. We have this DS store. If you're not familiar with Mac, that's just like it's more or less a temporary file in every folder that like tells Mac like what settings that folder has, and like maybe if you're sorted it or something like that. So we don't want to version that, right? Because it's particular to our system. It has nothing to do with the code. And as well, we have a distribution folder. We have this index. I assume this is not a good file, right? We don't actually want this.
No, as a backup that Jules wanted me to keep.
Cool. And any reason you wanted you to keep it?
Just to compare later. Although that's I probably don't need it anymore.
Okay. Well, yeah, just keep it on your machine then. We just won't version it. Library. Here's another one, node modules. So node modules, I don't know if you noticed, but whenever you do like npm init or npm install, it creates this folder, and that's where all the packages go, right?
Yeah.
So that's a generated file, as is this actually, right? Because whenever you do something on your system, it generates this file. The distribution folder, that's also generated, right? Because that's where we generate our CSS. And so you only actually want to save what are called the source files to your GitHub, okay? You don't want to change the ones that get generated, because then everyone will have, if you keep versioning that, every time somebody generates a file or maybe there's like an upload or something like that, it has to get versioned. But that's not really the purpose of versioning. The versioning is to keep track of your actual source files of your code. So, so we actually want to ignore these files, DS store, distribution, node modules, because all of those can be generated with a command. So we can maybe keep track of our commands and maybe write some instructions, right? Like npm install, and then everyone should have the same code base. But you don't want to generate, or you don't want to version the files that get generated. It just leads to a lot more complications that are necessary.
But the library isn't a generated file. I think I got that with the template.
Oh, you didn't make library.
No.
Yeah, so we're gonna start to get rid of some things because I noticed when going through here that like some stuff just that didn't apply to anything or was like empty or whatever. So we're gonna do some cleanup so it's a little more easy to navigate the project. So we'll get rid of that. But the first thing before we even add everything is we're gonna want to make a git ignore file. So if you're on the command line and you want to create a file, you just say touch. So touch git ignore, and I'm gonna open up this project. And this is just line by line. Each line is a file that you want, file or a directory that you want to ignore from versioning. Okay. So we're going to do ds store, do node modules.
What's the difference between touch to create a file and, oh no, I guess the other one is make directory, not
Yeah,
file.
one's a directory, one's a file, exactly. Distribution here, output.css. Okay, right. So we don't want that either. You can see my editor is actually graying these out, muting the color. So we know it's not being versioned. And the blue is actually stuff that I guess are new files we haven't added to our stage yet. And when I say stage, I don't mean website stage. I mean Git stage. It's just it means like the files that are being tracked and ready to kind of add to versioning. So that's fine. So now we have this. So now when I do git add all, okay, git add all. This is a shortcut for all files, everything in this directory. You could also do it one by one, but that's obviously very tedious, so we don't do that. But because we added that git ignore first, it's not going to add those grayed out files here into versioning. So we can effectively just ignore them. They only exist on our system once we're working with the code base and we're generating them. So once we added it, we're also going to want to give it a commit message. Okay. So basically we're committing these files to our repository, and it's not actually the files, it's the changes in the files. That's more or less the concept you have to get around your head in Git, is that you're tracking changes. You're not necessarily tracking files. You're tracking changes in the files, right? It's like the files kind of get included in the process. But every time you push something up, it's actually pushing alongside the files, you're pushing a bunch of tracked changes. So, this line is different from this line in this file at this time. So we're just going to say what we did. So this is the initialization of the project. So we'll just say initial code. And you see it created all these files, and all these files have lines in them, and now they're all tracked. But when you commit it, it's a commit log that gets stored on your actual computer. Okay, and then we need a way of telling. We need a way of actually sharing this code with other people, right? So it needs to be in a centralized place, and that's where GitHub comes in, or any other Git repository, Git remote repository. That's what it's actually called. It's a remote. So if you go back here, you'll see there's a couple little things. I have my Git to automatically make our main branch called main. It used to be master. Now the convention is main. So we don't have to run this because it already is. And then we have to add an origin, right? So what that's doing is it's saying to Git that we want to add a place where we can upload our Git source code. Okay, so the origin, we're going to call it the origin, and it's going to have this location, which is obviously a GitHub. So we can just paste this in. Okay, and if I refresh the page, you'll see we still have nothing, right? Because everything we've done so far is only on our local machine. That's also very important to understand, that when you're doing everything in Git, it's a local process, and everyone has their own copy of the code. It's very important to understand. And certain commands allow you to push your code and essentially push your changes of that code to a centralized place, to a server somewhere, which is in this case GitHub, and then other people to sync their local repository on their computer with the changes that are somewhere else. So everyone kind of continually pulls down things and works on their own little branches and whatnot. But at one point, everyone more or less syncs up on the same side, but all on their own computers via this remote location, right? Via this this server here. So the last step, whenever you want to actually push to your repository, is exactly that: git push. And we'll pass in this U flag. What is the U flag? Anyway, I think it's just set the user or something. So the first time around, git push origin master or origin main. That's going to actually upload all these files to Git, and now we should see a listing of them, right? So that's that. So at this point, there's really I won't get too much into Git. You know, we can maybe talk about it the more we start to actually share code. But the main commands you're going to need to know is git add, and then the name of a file, whatever you have index, right? But usually, if you set up your git ignore properly, you just kind of want to version always everything in your project. So you more or less always just do git add dot, which is everything, right? So if I list the files in dot, I'm listing the files in the current directory. Same
and that'll
thing here.
still ignore the files in your git ignore, even if you're doing add all.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so they kind of work in tandem, right? Because if you don't add a git ignore and there's some files you don't want to track into your versioning, then you always have to write these complicated add statements, and you'll probably forget at one point and it'll get tracked and you didn't want it. You have to remove it, blah, 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 blah. So it's always really good to maintain a very clean, good, encompassing git ignore file so that you can more or less always just run git add. And in fact, a lot of people make this into an alias where they'll do something like GAM and then a message, you know, where, and this is like basically a shortcut that does git add all and git commit, and you pass in your message to it. So because it's such a common command that you always git add, git commit, your message. And then, you know, once you're done on what you're working on and you want to share the code, you just git push origin, right? This is our origin here, git, and main is the branch we're on, right? I have my terminal configured to display the branch. Which brings us to the next point. So the reason I wanted to version this with you is because I did want to keep your state here, and we can do maybe some refactoring so you can always compare different states of our refactoring of the code, right? So what we can do is we can make a branch, or sorry, a quick way of doing this is we can actually checkout will move to a branch. So, you know, on a lot of Git projects, you probably have a lot of different branches going on, especially if you have like feature focused development where you make a branch for every feature and then you move it in. So checkout is to basically move to another branch. But if we want to move to another branch that doesn't exist already and we want to create it in the process, we can pass in the branch flag here. So we're going to get checkout to a new branch called, and we'll call this Greg refactor 1. Okay, we'll keep it short like this.
Okay.
Okay, and then next time we can maybe do a Greg refactor 2 and stuff like that. So now we're on this branch. So anything we do in here and we push, blah, 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 it won't affect anything on main. So you can rest assured that you're not going to lose, even if I deleted everything in this repo right now and committed it to the branch and pushed it, I could just check out to our main branch and all the files are still there. So it's two completely separate states. Any questions so far?
If I just refreshed my GitHub, it still says there's only the one branch, the main branch.
Because I haven't, remember, Very
'cause
important.
you
Go
haven't
ahead.
pushed your branch to.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. So the branch you're making is just local.
Yes. In fact, nothing really ever happens until you see that push command being run. Every other command I'm doing on here, it's always being done directly on my local machine. Only when you see git push, then I'm basically saying, okay, I want to actually upload whatever I'm dictating in that command to some place. And usually you pass the origin main, right? So it's the address of your origin and the branch or some other branch or whatever. A tag.
Okay, so that's at the point where you have the option of either overwriting this main branch or going to a second branch that people can go to, or does it save all the
So
branches?
I wouldn't overwrite the main. So right now, if I were to do okay, I'll give you an example. Okay, let's make this real. So I noticed here when I pushed it, I forgot to get rid of this file. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna remove the file. No.
No, that's a good file.
Yeah, exactly. But we versioned things. So even if I deleted it, it's cool, right? Because we already have this. It's in our history. We can go back in time and stuff. I'm gonna remove this. I'm gonna say old file not needed. And our commit. Oh, okay. Perfect example. So I deleted this, but I actually didn't stage it for deletion. Okay. So it's a little confusing because we're adding, and we just deleted a file. But when we're saying git add, it means we're adding a file. We're making sure it's the file is tracked as a change in Git. And so if we deleted it, we have to make sure okay, we're tracking the fact that we deleted it. So I just have to run this first and I'll rerun this command. That's fine. Okay. And you still won't see any changes here. You still won't see any branch here.
Yeah.
But now if I want to say if you want to go over the changes in after we're done refactoring, if you want to go over it on your machine and not in a web browser or on GitHub, well, I'm going to want to share it with you. So I'm going to push it to our origin, which is GitHub, and the name of the branch, because it's not main anymore. We're on Greg Refactor 1. And you see it in real time. We have this new branch. And if we go there, let's just refresh. All right, it's listed here. And we see we don't have this file anymore. Okay, so now we have two states. We have one in main, where we had some of your more original code, and then we have mine that actually has a change that's been pushed.
And if
we can look in the commits here and we see, oh, because I did this on my branch here, it has this commit that I just pushed. So this was a change to our code base.
Okay.
And we have initial code. But if we go to your main branch, we only have initial code. That's because at the point where I branched off, we already had that initial code commit, which was basically all our files.
And if you had pushed to main, that would have overwritten what's there, right?
Yes. Yes. And there's a process for that, right? Because you can't just push to main if other people have changed it. If other people have affected your main branch, obviously it's not a very good versioning process if you can just overwrite code. That's the whole point of it, is that you want to collaborate on your code, even if it's on the same file. So in that case, you start looking into things like pulling your code, right? So before you push, you need to pull any changes and rectify them if Git can't, combine them and merge them into one file, if it's confusing what line of code should stay.
Okay, but there'll be some sort of warning or
yes,
that'll stop you from just pushing to main.
Yeah, what happens is if there's, let's say I was on main right now and there's a change on main that I don't have on my local computer, on my local instance of Git, and I go to push to it and it'll just say, you don't have these changes yet. Please pull these changes on this branch. And then you can push yours, right? Because I can't push something to a state that it has already changed. I have to have a consistent state of the branch on that repository.
Okay, I think you're getting a little confused, because if you can't, whatever is changed on the branch on the main, okay, if something on the main is changed, then you have to alter it on your branch. But if you change something on your branch and you want to upload it to main, that's okay, right? It's just the other way that's not.
No, I need your change before I can commit my change because they can conflict.
Right.
Right. So if there's a change on main that I don't have before I can make another change on top of it, because now you'll have two different changes from two different users on the same file, that's going to lead to problems. Before anyone could push, they need to have all current changes on that branch up to date in your repository.
Okay.
And then you can push up your own change. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Change goes one way. You can't override a changed file, but you can upload a file that you've already changed on yours into to rechange the main.
Yeah, you can only change things when you have all the changes that exist, right? Because there's multiple users, right?
Yeah.
So like if other people were making changes that I wasn't aware of, well, that becomes a problem. So that's the whole idea of Git is since everyone has their own version of the code base, there could be, you never know what changes exist on the remote, right? Until you pull it down. You can obviously check, but you need to make sure it's you're in a clean sort of state before you start pushing your own, because you first have to make sure we're looking at the code we want to look at, and the files are all working correctly.